Tyra Deckard. I'm a PhD student in curriculum and instruction at the University of Louisville. Today, I'm presenting on a project that I've been working on with my co-researchers, Denise Cumberland and Andrea Ellinger. And the title of my presentation is Listening and Learning from Employees, Opening a Dialogue on Racial Injustice. The theoretical framework that we began with was open systems theory and mega events. Open systems theory suggests that organizations are impacted by events that occur inside and outside their boundaries. And mega events are considered large-scale cultural, political, or commercial events that attract significant media attention and influence firm-level actions. We conducted an illustrative qualitative study that was intended to explore how employees in a large U.S. healthcare organization have been impacted by the racial injustice mega events of the summer of 2020. These events included the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and the shooting of Breonna Taylor in her home. The company conducted virtual listening calls. These will sometimes be referred to as LCs. And they were designed to give employees voice, understand employees' feelings, and to garner ideas for how the organization could build a more inclusive future. There were 2 questions asked on these listening calls. Number 1 was, what are you feeling about the current spotlight on racial injustice? And number 2, what should our company be doing differently to create a more inclusive workplace? In total, 388 employees voluntarily participated in the LCs. And we had 50 LCs that were transcribed and analyzed for this project. To analyze the data, we used Saldana's structural coding approach. So the data was coded based on the research questions. And then there was a second route of coding that identified themes within those research questions. And finally, we took meaningful statements from participants and we extracted them and connected them to the codes to illustrate those themes that we had identified. When the employees were asked about their emotions experienced as a result of the mega events of summer 2020, we found 8 themes that emerged. The most frequently mentioned theme was sadness and disappointment. This was mentioned by 125 participants out of the 388. That's 22% of those participants. And it was brought up in 84% of the focus group listening calls. The second most frequent mentioned theme was hopefulness and optimism. And then we had anger and frustration. Now, anger and frustration had 2 sub-themes to express the different ways that people were angry. So one was anger that racism still exists in 2020. And the second one was anger over protests or perceptions of reverse bias. The next theme was confused and overwhelmed, then fear and anxiety. And with that one, we had 3 sub-themes: fear for one's family, self, and friends due to racism, fear due to protests turning violent, and fear for the well-being of future generations. And then the final 3 themes were shame and guilt, pessimism, and exhaustion. Now, to illustrate these themes, we extracted some quotes from the listening call participants, and I'm just going to read some examples of those here. When they talked about sadness, one participant said, "I feel sadness that after all these years, this is where we are." Another said, "Sadness, pain for the lives that have been lost and the families that were left behind in their pain." And we also had several mentions of hope, and here's one of the quotes. "I feel hopeful. It's amazing that so many haven't had to think about this and are all of a sudden thinking about it and learning and growing." When the participants discussed fear, several of them gave specific examples of the ways they felt afraid. And here's one example. I have 3 adult sons who are Black. My son got pulled over because his tags were expired, and he called me. I was scared, crying, saying, "Don't move, don't move. I just want him to stay alive after a traffic stop like everyone else." Another participant said, "I can jog down the street and get shot. This is a fear I have had every day, and it has never gone away." Several participants expressed guilt and shame that they had never understood their white privilege. So here's an example of that. Guilt and embarrassment for not feeling that I truly understood the problem until now. I did not fully understand what white privilege meant until it was brought to my attention. And then the final theme I'm going to provide an example of here is exhaustion. And we did not collect demographic data from the participants, but in their speaking, many of them self-identified as minorities. And most of the participants who mentioned exhaustion had self-identified as minorities. This person said, "Tired of the same old thing over and over and over again. Exhausting to deal with because it is not anything new and it is just more in your face right now. And everybody is dealing with it. But I feel like I've been dealing with it all my life and as African Americans all our lives. So it is just exhausting, just tiring." Our second question asked participants what they think the company should change to provide more inclusivity and diversity. We came up with 5 themes from this discussion. Listen to us, which many expressed they felt like the listening calls were a good start to this. Next was focus on culture, and this mostly pertained to the workplace culture and the core values of the organization. Then we had provide more diversity education, build a diverse organization across the ranks, and hold leaders accountable. So some of our illustrative quotes, when they spoke about listen to us, one participant said, "We can learn from talking to people who are different than we are. Everyone's experiences are going to be different, and how they feel about it will be different. These conversations should have taken place months, even years ago. Instead of throwing money at the situation, start the conversation first. A lot of us feel like there are going to be consequences if we speak up." And the topic of education was mentioned frequently as well. So in requesting more diversity education, one participant said, "My assumption is people who may not be open to diversity may not get on these calls. If we mandate this as part of our annual training, maybe one thing in that training will strike a nerve and force them to reevaluate how they think, their past behaviors, etc." Another said, "One thing I've noticed with my team here is that I would like to see more of this inclusion training done with our staff at the local level, giving them more guidance. We have an older generation that sometimes says things that are inappropriate, and someone will say, 'That was normal back then,' and I'd like to say, we can change that." And it was also noted that there was a lack of representation across the ranks and especially in leadership. This person said, "Diversity in leadership roles is missing. There is diversity in the company, but people of color are not in positions of power. We need diversity in leadership. The time is not for talk, but for action, showing diversity rather than talking about it." And some participants also expressed that while the listening calls were a good start to promoting inclusivity, the organization should stay focused and continue on the way they were going. So this person said, "We should keep this going so that each of us develops more robust equity and inclusion skills. Don't lose sight of the work we are doing. Keep this moving and keep this going forward." This study has several implications for practice across organizations. One of them is the value of creating what Whiteley et al. Call a learning space. This is where employees can share their own emotions, interpretations, and assessments. And then this supports the need for creating negotiated space where employees and management engage in learning with and from each other. So in conclusion, we found that when employees are provided a place to authentically share what they are feeling about race, it creates a social dialogic process. Now, this dialogic process allows employees to engage in conversations that help them recognize the humanity in each other, as well as identify with the shared sentiments of others, encouraging greater empathy. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to talking to you at the Q&A.